So I hope everyone is enjoying PorkFest. This isn't going to be the most uplifting speech, and I kind of apologize for that, but it's kind of the nature of the topic in general. So I'm a former Child Protective Services investigator out of San Antonio, Texas. Can everyone hear me all right? We good all around? Oh, fantastic. Okay, so there's a recent news article out of North Carolina that kind of exemplifies my views and the truth in regards to Child Protective Services. Not only how they treat children, but also the kind of background check they do in regards to the people who work for them. A child protective supervisor, foster parent, is found guilty after deputies found an 11-year-old boy handcuffed to a porch with a dead chicken around his neck. Yeah, exactly. His look completely, the perplexing look, that's actually what I thought when I read it. But then I started thinking about my prior work in child protective services and the lackluster job they did whenever it came to actually taking care of kids. Now, presently there are 397,000 children in out-of-home care. That is care provided by Child Protective Services. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone aware of here is how aware of kind of the amount of abuse that is occurring to children in America, which is astronomically high, right? So we can be at a grocery store and we can see some parent just beating up his kid and no one really says a thing. So when you hear 397,000, you don't exactly feel surprised. Well, the thing is that 85% of all removals by Child Protective Services are not for physical or sexual abuse. So they're not for that. The vast majority of cases in Child Protective Services are for something called neglect. The vast majority of these cases regarding neglect is of parents using or admitting to using marijuana or drugs in general. So what also has to be kept in mind is what Child Protective Services considers care. And I came across some rather startling statistics in regards to foster care. So foster children are 7 to 8 times more likely to be physically, sexually, or emotionally abused than children in normal households. When you keep in mind that 85% of those removals were for not that kind of abuse, that's where it becomes just really astonishingly awful. Now, 50% of all foster children who age out end up homeless for at least 5 years whenever they leave the foster home. The vast majority of the homeless in America were at one point foster children. They are 3 times more likely to be put on psychotropic drugs than children in similar financial situations due to the financial incentives provided to you by the state. They're more likely to get post-traumatic stress disorder than veterans of war and less likely to recover from it. And they are 6 times more likely to die than if they stayed in an abusive household. So, going by the statistics, obviously libertarians should be talking about this particular subject. We're talking about police abuse, we're talking about military abuse, we're talking about the Federal Reserve. Well, when you think of the tyrannical actions of this agency who supposedly has the best interests of children in mind, you start to kind of understand why I believe it's so important to discuss these topics, mainly because CPS has time and time again gone after people who state that they're marijuana activists, people who homeschool their children, people who are against vaccinations. Right? This has happened a lot. In fact, in Austin, Texas, a marijuana activist there had his child taken for supposedly promoting marijuana use actively, and his child died in foster care in 2 weeks. So we have to be talking about this. So the thing about, in order to understand Child Protective Services, what we need to do is we need to understand the history of Child Protective Services and to see why it's ended up the way it is right now. And there's a legal term. It's called parens patriae, and it means that the government not only has the ability, but the obligation to look at the best interests of children of mine and those who are legally unfit to take care of themselves. Of course, that's a dictate by the state. Now, this started really taking hold in the late 1800s, early 1900s, mainly with the work of Francis Galton. Now, Galton was the cousin of Charles Darwin and was a promoter of the term social Darwinism, which had nothing to do with actual evolution. It had to do with pseudoscience. A big part of this is, well, progressivism, right? So for those who aren't as acquainted with it, when we think of progressivism, we think the progress of humanity as a whole. What he really meant was the progress of the humans that he wanted to see prosper. which was Nordic white males. He was very adamant that Negroes were savages who needed to be removed from society lest they end up marrying white people and destroy the genetic lineage, right? A noted activist at the time who was part of the child rights welfare campaign and progressivism as a whole was Margaret Sanger. She, as many know, started Planned Parenthood. She stated in a letter in regards to Planned Parenthood to a friend, "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and we can use the minister to prevent any kind of rebellious strike from occurring." She actually had a lot of ties with black churches who started promoting things like Planned Parenthood, so no one would assume certain things. Now, Francis Galton also promoted eugenics. Now, eugenics is a word that we normally associate with the Nazis, right, folks? But the thing is that they actually took their ideas from basically British Americans. Now, the eugenics agencies that were set up were funded directly by the Rockefellers and the Carnegie Foundation, as in the people who now fund NPR. And the thing is that all academics kind of agreed in regards to eugenics. In fact, 367 colleges all promoted the Nordic race as being the strongest race and the Negroes as something that needed to be dealt with. Mainly they needed to be dealt with because after the end of slavery, you suddenly had black people being allowed to own property. You also had a booming population due to lower infanticide rates due to medical technology and a freer market. You also had an influx of immigrants. Now, it should be clear that they weren't just against black people, they were also against Irish people and a lot of southern whites that they codified as rednecks. So Galton, in order for him to be able to kind of state that if you had a high IQ, you were a better individual, even though he was physically handicapped, he set up an IQ test in order to justify sterilization. So on the IQ test, if you had a lower than an 80 IQ, you could be forcibly sterilized by the state. So they went into places like the South, and essentially, here, let me give you an example real quick. You have a kid, he's just did a 14-hour shift, he slept 5 hours. Right after his 14-hour shift, they give him the IQ test. He doesn't even know what it is. He lowers lower than 80. The next morning, they pick him up, they bring him to a hospital, and they sterilize him. And so essentially, there was a lot of eugenics at play in America. Now, this is where the child welfare thing kind of comes in. So another thing they wanted to deal with was the Native American population, who they also codified as savages. So one of the ways they went ahead and did that was supposedly through reparations by reservations. Right, so as we all know, there's Indian reservations. What a lot of people don't realize about these reservations is, one, the laws that they're following have nothing to do with ancient or older Native American laws. They were created by the government. And as a result, Native American populations are prevented from being able to actually hold property. The chief is the tyrannical leader. It's essentially, in a way, it's much like kind of North Korea as far as that's concerned. So what you're doing is you're preventing any Native Americans from being really able to succeed or progress as a species, as they would classify it. And one of the things they would do is they'd go into a home, right, social worker would go into a home, and if they saw that the woman had too many children, they would state that if she wanted to get any more welfare checks, she would have to be sterilized. So they sterilized about 30,000 Native Americans during this whole situation. Not only did they do that, this is where Child Protective Services kind of comes in. They would go into homes, social workers would go into a house, and if it wasn't one dad, one mom, kids, then that would be considered against the puritanical nuclear family. They would remove your kids and stick them in a white community or a white public school. They also did this in the Negro populations right after LBJ's wonderful reduction in poverty procedures, which created artificial black ghettos that prevented any black businesses from being able to start up. So you put the black population on a leash and you segregate them outside of society. Then, up until 1974, it was legally allowed to prevent food stamps from going to a woman unless she got sterilized after having too many children. They were still sterilizing black people up until the 1970s. In fact, in North Carolina, you were allowed to, if you were a social worker, you could state that anyone was unfit to be a parent, even without an IQ test, and they would sterilize them. Right? So this That's the backbone of Child Protective Services. And it's not a whole lot better now. So it's commonly stated that the history of mankind is a history of crimes. And that's too misanthropic for me. Rather, the history of mankind in the state is one filled with tyrannical actions, all under the presupposition that it's for the best interests of everyone, while it is antithetical to that except for the elite. Now, when it came to social workers, a lot of them did have the best interests of children in mind, right? As did I. So I started working for Child Protective Services after a few real-life altercations that had occurred. I had seen people beating up their kids at a grocery store. I remember one particular occasion, there was a 6-year-old man and a 3-year-old girl, and he was just slapping her in the face because she was trying to grab at a balloon at a grocery store. So I got down on my knees. By the way, don't do this, ever. Don't. Put my hands behind my back, and I said, does it make you feel like a man for hitting your kid? And he punched me. I fell on the floor. I got back up. He slapped me again. I kept my hands behind my back because I'm like, well, I'm this big, scary Mexican. Everybody's going to say I'm trying to beat up an old man if there's a camera. And what occurred was a manager steps in and a bunch of old people run in and state, how dare you tell that man how to raise his child? No one came to the defense of a 3-year-old girl who's being hit by an old man. Everyone came to the defense of the old man because we always go to the defense of those who are in power in our society, and certainly not the kids. And a cop there told me, well, you should have called Child Protective Services. So I don't know how that would have worked, but I was like, okay. So I got out of college, I turned in an application to work for Child Protective Services, and I was let right in with my sociology degree. So I'm allowed to make fun of my own major. The thing about Child Protective Services is, right, so in our minds, essentially an investigator needs to have a thorough understanding of child development, right? Because you need to know how to question kids correctly. Because if you don't, then they're not going to understand, and they'll end up giving you false allegations. You need to also have an understanding of psychology in order to be able to decipher fact from fiction when talking to a parent. You also have to have an understanding of dispute resolution, because in my case, I go into some person's house, everyone has guns, there's maybe a lot of drugs involved in this particular occasion, people are yelling at me, and I'm just sitting there just like, ooh, I'm a college graduate, what the hell's going on? And I have to ask them questions in regard to, did you molest your children? So you might need some understanding of dispute resolution. You also need to understand forensics, right? So you need to be able to tell if a bruise came from a punch, a fall, or a spanking. How much training do you think I got? Okay, you guys are way too cynical. 0? Really? They didn't just throw me straight in there. Man, fucking libertarians, they always get me. It's 2 months. 2 months of training, that's it, right? 2 months to be able to do all those different things. And the vast majority of our training was not regarding any of those particular subjects. It was about creating an us versus them mentality, where you are basically put in the position of always thinking that adults are child molesters and child abusers. It's kind of like cop training, where they always tell cops, if you pull someone over, there's a very high chance you're going to get shot. There's not. There's a much higher chance of someone hitting you with their car, but they never quite figured that one out. So from there, we have these, terrible investigators, and then the investigation starts. Now, when an investigation starts, a allegation of abuse is made to Child Protective Services, right? You make a phone call. I love the acoustic music behind me. I feel so deep right now. And so a call is made regarding supposed abuse. Now, this abuse can be that a child is being left outside too often, is being allowed to play 2 blocks away from his home, that a child is being homeschooled, that a child is not vaccinated, but rarely it's for actual physical abuse. Now, here's the thing about the alleger. They can be anonymous or they can name themselves, but the accused will never know the accuser, which, if you guys are fans of the Constitution, that's breaking the 6th Amendment. In fact, the Child Protective Services in their proceedings breaks the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 14th Amendment. Yeah, either ignores it or rejects it outright. Now, from here, we have essentially, so the call is made in, and then a supervisor tells the investigator where to go, right? Or here's the case. Now, according to the state of Texas and every other state, because of parens patriae, the state owns the child. The parent does not own the child, which is why you're told as an investigator to always go and try to talk to a kid before they're ever even given the chance to talk to their parent regarding it. So it's kind of creepy. So essentially, you go out to their community center, their church, anywhere you like, where a kid is, and then you stick them in a room and you talk to them alone with no background check, by the way. State of Texas, there was, I think it was 142 different sex offenders working for Child Protective Services. So, but the main place that Child Protective Service investigators like going to is public schools, because there's already institutionalized, indoctrination there. So why not bring an investigator? So I'd like to put you in a kind of scenario real quick. So let's say you're 5 years old, right? You've just been thrown into this public institution where you're coordinated with an aggregate of other individuals and coerced souls in the lines and told exactly what to do, what to think, all those good things. You're a little bit scared. And then suddenly out of nowhere, some big Puerto Rican man knocks on the door and says, "Hi, my name is Carlos Morales. I'm from Child Protective Services. I want to investigate you today." Do you think that kid knows what the fuck you're talking about? Probably not. They never really did. So I take this kid, I put him into another room, right? And then I ask, can I record this conversation? According to Child Protective Services, 5-year-olds are capable of consent, right? And even, by the way, if they don't say anything, you're supposed to go, just say yes. We were told this in training. Yeah, folks. So then from there, you ask them some softball questions, like what's your favorite color? Who's your favorite teacher? Do you have friends? That kind of stuff. And then you start throwing in the hard-hitting questions, like how often do you touch your father's penis? How often do your parents hit you? Do you know the leading part of that, by the way? How often do you hit your wife? There's a presupposition that you're hitting your wife. Well, that's how you outline the questions of Child Protective Services. And due to this, there was a series of false allegations made by kids time and time and time again. And the greatest case of this kind of false reports are the satanic ritualistic abuse that was apparently occurring in daycares in the 1990s. Do you guys remember that? All the Satanists. So it turns out it wasn't really occurring. But, okay, so after a book called Michelle Remembers comes out by these two fraudulent authors that basically state that there is rampant satanic abuses and sacrifices going around the world. So there was over 1,000 false satanic ritualistic abuse allegations made, right? And what happens whenever you get a moral freak out in society? Well, the government gets more money. So what they started doing is funding Child Protective Services meetups in which they discuss satanic ritualistic abuse and how it's occurring and how to properly investigate in regards to this. Basically, they got taught how to do a lot of different leading questions because they stated that the children are being hypnotized to prevent them from being able to answer questions correctly. So there was a daycare that basically one of the parents stated, oh, there's satanic abuse going on. So these coached CPS investigators went to these kids, and here are some of the fun claims that some of the kids made. The daycare workers are getting on brooms and flying around the place. They're taking machetes and shoving them up at the ass of babies in there. In the facility. Mind you, there was no proof of any physical abuse occurring. You'd imagine a machete would probably leave a bit of an issue there. Also, that children are being thrown, put in the toilets and being flushed down the toilet. Also, that Chuck Norris came in from hell and karate chopped someone. That did happen, didn't it? So this all led to a $6 million case, right? The most expensive court case at that time in history, and it kind of created the moral panic. And after 2 years of investigations, a lot of daycare workers got thrown in jail, and then after a little bit of investigation by the FBI, everyone was taken out of jail. What do you think happened to all the CPS workers? Most of them became supervisors. Yes, I love libertarians. So, and what do you think happened with funding? 1,500%. Increase in federal funding for the National Center of Child Abuse, because in the state, failure equals more money. So you have that issue, right? So you have the issue of false allegations being made, and there's plenty of recordings out there of investigators basically coaching these kids. Another issue that occurs, how am I on time, by the way? What time is it, folks? 2:20. Holy shit, was my speech supposed to be done at 2:30? We'll see. Okay, no, okay. Oh, yes. Fantastic. I talk a lot. Okay, so another issue that is occurring here is what Child Protective Services is considered evidence. So again, we have the issue of anonymous reporters, right? So there's that problem. And then we have the memory issue. Now, if I see this man right here hit this woman, and then afterwards someone starts investigating me about it, I might end up making stuff up, right? Because of just kind of false memories. In fact, there's been cases in which someone is walking down the street, there's a camera of them, a car wreck occurs behind them, they don't see the car wreck occurring, cops come and ask them questions, and they talk about the color of the car. Like, they act as if they remembered everything. Not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously. Now, with Child Protective Services, you can get a kid removed from a house based on an allegation made by someone who overheard something a year ago from someone else. So evidence is the memory off the memory off the memory off the story of someone else that occurred a year ago. And there's a wonderful game that kind of exemplifies how absolutely stupid this is. You guys know the telephone game? Yeah, so one adult tells a kid, I don't know, Dan is red. And then he tells another kid, and everybody's whistling. And then by the end of it, the last kid says, dragons are awesome, right? So you end up with a completely different story. But instead of an insightful giggle with Child Protective Services, you have families being destroyed. And another issue here is not only is there the memory issue, there's the incentives to make false allegations. Now, within Child Protective Services, if you make a false allegation, do you know what happens to you? Nothing. You can't even get sued, right? So people make a lot of false allegations. In divorce cases, you can immediately be given custody due to a Child Protective Services case. So I dealt with a lot of cases in which you had a husband and wife. The wife asserts that the husband is sexually abusing the daughter, and even after it is proven false, the woman still gets the custody of the kids because at the time of the divorce hearings, there was an open case, and nothing happened to the woman for that, right? There's also cases of neighbors being mad at each other. So here's a common case of mine. So there's this essay over there who is snorting cocaine off of the behinds of prostitutes. There's strippers in the house, cocaine, heroin everywhere. Oh, and there's tons of guns. I go out to the house. Oh, by the way, they also have ties with the Mexican mafia. That was a huge thing in false allegations. I don't know why. I'd go into the house, and there'd be absolutely nothing there whatsoever, nothing proving anything. I'd go back up to the neighbor and say, hey, no evidence was found. They go, well, I knew it wasn't necessarily real, but I felt that something wrong was going on over there, right? They don't get in any trouble. Teachers also make false allegations of medical neglect. So I don't like this kid because this kid's kind of an asshole and he's not listening to me. Well, he obviously has ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder, right? Well, she just created the diagnosis. And then she can call CPS and say the parents are medically neglecting the kids because they're not being given medication. So from there, Child Protective Services goes out there. They bring the kid to a state health doctor. State health doctors kind of have a fetish for giving kids drugs. If you don't take the drugs, in one particular case, SWAT teams went out to a house to force a child to take psychotropic medications. Ooh, always such a positive talk. And then there was other particular cases where I was at high school and one kid would tell me, oh, well, I called CPS on that bitch because she's a cunt. So they made up false allegations of abuse, student to student. And when you're in an impoverished area that may or may not be directly funded by the state in a lot of different ways, having the state in your life is just a common part of your life. You just call the cops on people to fuck with them. So you have those incentives. And then you also have the financial incentives. Now, when I talk about Child Protective Services, generally what's brought up is this is just a few bad apples. And I contest that the apples that they came from was at a root of a tree that was evil, and that the root issue here is financial incentives. So the 1997 Safe Family Adoption Act granted $4,000 to every single agency that had a quick removal of a child. What do you think happened to removals, folks? Skyrocketed. And the media interpreted it as, wow, they're finally getting their job done. They're finally getting those kids out of those houses without doing any fucking investigations. Now, so Child Protective Services is allotted more money for every single child they remove. Courts only stay open if allegations are being made, right? Family court, which is its own specific type of hell. Defense prosecuting attorneys, well, they make more money for every single child they get removed from a home. And then State-backed defense attorneys are not allotted more money for every single case they disprove. They're allotted more money for every single case that happens, right? So you need to get this case out as quickly as possible. So you just tell the parent, just admit that you're guilty, and then they'll be nice to you. They're never nice to you. So you have all of that, and then you have where it gets real sick, which is foster homes. So as already mentioned, the incredibly vulgar statistics of foster homes in America. What you have is another kind of financial incentive also. So foster homes are granted more money for every kid they get in, right? Which makes sense. They're also granted more money for every single child that has a disability. So if a kid's paralyzed, you bring him to a hospital. Makes sense. It's going to cost you a lot of money. There's another kind of disability according to the state, and those are called psychological disorders. So you're a kid. You just got taken out of your home, your school, your community, your church, your parents, all that good stuff. So you might have issues paying attention in school, because seriously, fuck these guys. Who cares about them? You might have issues sleeping. You might be mad, mood swings. Occasionally you can't sleep, so then you end up maybe seeing some things, because that kind of occurs to insomniacs. So according to us as rational folks, we'd call those environmental stressors causing psychological issues, which are rational, and therefore we should get rid of the situation. According to a state health doctor, that child has oppositional defiant disorder, attention deficit disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression. Did I not mention any? I think it's pretty much it. Right? So, and anxiety, my favorite. God knows that's unhealthy. And with that kid gets 7 psychotropic drugs. I knew 7-year-olds on more than 7 psychotropic drugs at a given moment. So I'd go into a house and you'd have a foster home and the kid would be completely zonked out on drugs. Foster parent also has an incentive to drug the hell out of the kids because finally they shut up. Now I could bring another kid in. You make all the kids zombies, it's easier to bring them in and bring them in. This is not stating that all foster parents are evil. I always have to say that afterwards, but seriously, the averages are awful. So you have that when it comes to foster homes in America. Now, the courts in Child Protective Services are their own abhorrent place in hell.
We had 3 million sides of old wine horses' hides. We had 4 million barrels of bone. We had 5 million hogs, 6 million dogs, and 7 million barrels of porter. 8 million bales of old petticoat tails, and the whole of the Irish.
Fantastic. That was going to get very tiresome quickly. And I'm sure for everyone else, just Jesus. Okay, so they go after a number of different families, right? So if you play your cards right, you'll be in a stronger community, say New Hampshire, where you have a number of individuals who will not be calling Child Protective Services on you. Instead, they'll have the balls to actually go up to talk to you, discuss maybe some of the ways that you're treating your kids. right? So we try to create a community of activists who are aware of one another, and instead of always going to the state, we go to other individuals and actually talk to them person to person, rather than allocating all of our power to an external authority that is going to destroy us. So from there, hopefully Child Protective Services never gets called on you. Here's the thing. From here, a Child Protective Services investigator may decide to finally go up to your house if a report is made. The CPS investigator will then knock on your door and say, "Hi, my name is such and such from Child Protective Services. Can I come into your home?" Never let a Child Protective Services investigator in your house ever, 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 okay? And the reason why is because dirty dishes can be considered neglectful, and that can make you unfit to be a parent, right? So you don't want to let them in your house. 2, record the entire conversation. Most of us have phones here that can do it, and if you have a kid, $5 recorder ain't a bad idea. Here's the thing. Child Protective Services investigators are told not to write word for word what happened. Rather, you write tiny notes, and then you go back to your office, and then you make a narrative format. So you create a story. So if you record the entire thing, you're going to be a lot better off. Now, if you can afford a family court attorney, they're straight up state, "I'm not going to talk to you today. You can talk to my attorney. Close the door. Don't let them in your house whatsoever." And in fact, the only way they can go into your house is if they have a warrant to be able to come into your home with a cop. Here's the thing. If it's an anonymous report, they are legally not allowed to just burst into your house. Now, a lot of times they don't actually follow the Constitution, but if they don't, then you have a better case in court. So if you are going to talk to a Child Protective Service investigator, they're going to ask you a number of different questions regarding your background. Never admit a few different things. Never admit that you've ever been put on psychotropic drugs. Never admit that you've ever been physically abused as a kid. Even if you state that the mom has no part in your life anymore, that is considered grounds for, well, this person may be mentally unstable because they used to be abused, right? Never admit prior domestic violence. A child got removed from a mother even though the father had been out of the house for 3 years because he hit her once. So she was considered unfit to be a parent. Because God knows foster homes are better off. So essentially, don't admit anything. Make sure to not contradict yourself. If your child does have a bruise, do not show the investigator the child, right? But the thing is that a CPS investigator cannot close the case until they see the kid. If your kid has no bruising whatsoever, you can bring your child to the front door, they can see him, but they will not talk to him. Here's an important bit here. If you have kids who are in public school, get them out. But if you can't, tell them about Child Protective Services, and if they ever come to talk to them, don't say anything to CPS. I know it's a big conversation to have with a 5-year-old, but it's better off that than not being able to keep your 5-year-old because of the state. So make sure to, of course... All right. Is that working again? Fantastic. Okay, not a big deal. Ooh, that sounds better. Whew. Man, I talk a lot. Jesus Christ. So... Not only that, though, don't allow any private interviews with your kids for obvious reasons, for all the other coach reasons I've already discussed. Obviously, come on now. I'm sure you've been able to figure that one out. And expect coercion, expect lying. These people do not like you. They are not your friends. They're not your psychologists. Admit to any issues that you're having in your life whatsoever. You have a perfect home. And if you do get in court, get a family court attorney that you're actually paying for and not by the state. Think about how much time you've spent raising your kid. Think about the hundreds of thousands of dollars possibly you've spent on them. And think about that being all flushed down the toilet because you didn't want to spend $5,000 on an attorney. It's worth going into debt for, more so than sticking your kid in college. So with all that, those are the key points as far as dealing with Child Protective Services is concerned. Record everything, document everything, don't contradict yourself, do not admit to any prior abuse whatsoever. Don't let them be able to talk to your kids, and let your friends know either do not talk to Child Protective Services, which they probably shouldn't be doing anyway, or if they're going to talk to Child Protective Services, basically just state these are wonderful parents, there's no issues, that is it. Right? So those are the main things. There's little things that are more of an issue when it comes to inner court battles. And if any of you have any issues with those, there's a website called fightcps.com that has a lot of great lawyers on there. And I do consultation work pretty much pro bono unless they are nice enough to donate money for anyone who's having a Child Protective Services case in America. I do through email and everything else. You can find all of that at truthovercomfort.net. My email address is on there. Anyone can email me anytime. in regards to child protective services. So obviously, this is an important issue to all libertarians as a whole, and it should be an issue, the welfare of children. And the thing is whenever I bring this up, this is kind of a side note, but whenever I bring up child protective services, what's usually brought up to me is, what are we going to do without child protective services? And that's like asking me, what are we going to do about drug users without the DEA? We don't want to replace a kidnapping agency. We want to try our best to create a peaceful community with freedom-loving individuals and be able to take the locus of control away from the state and back onto ourselves. There's this misconception regarding libertarians that it's all about leaving me alone. It's about getting left alone by the state. But having a strong community builds a stronger fabric to be able to prosper as far as a free society goes when it comes to trading. So everyone's been stating the market could take care of a lot of these issues. And if we're going to make it as far as being able to foster a libertarian society, we need to do our best to keep our kids out of the hands of the state. Thank you. So, question time, folks? All right. Okay. Do we have... Wait, we have like 2 mics now, don't we? Because we got that one over there. All right, screw it. Here you go.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to comment. That the McMartin case, which I guess you were alluding to earlier, with the witchcraft and all of that, not only destroyed good people's lives who had a really good daycare, but the kids who made the false allegations later as adults came out and said they were totally traumatized by the fact that they had lied, and been led into that, and were living with that horror as adults. So it was, and I just wanted to make that point.
If you can just say it out loud or something. You want to ask a question?
Yes. Besides the 2 Latin terms, meaning the state owns your kids, is there any legal or constitutional justification that CPS can state and allude to say that
if you're in a court case, can you say that, well, the NSA and the DEA are unconstitutional, therefore this court case isn't allowed to be held? Probably not. Obviously, it's an unconstitutional group. Family court, in fact, you're not in a court in front of your peers. You're in front of a court with just a judge who's dictating what's going to happen to your kids, who really doesn't give a crap about you. So that's why it's really important. Another suggestion I have for lawyers is look around as far as family court attorneys go. Make sure they specialize in family court. Not only that they are hated by Child Protective Services. Sometimes people get that reputation, and it's a wonderful reputation to have in a lawyer.
Okay, so here in New Hampshire, Representative Dan Itzy. Representative Dan Itzy, and I believe it was 2010, I think, or 09, brought up a constitutional amendment which would state that in New Hampshire, the parents own the children. Unless there is some proof that the parents have abused the children, it is presumed they are their property. The children are the property of the parents. The bar to get a constitutional amendment passed is higher than for a law. He had a lot of good testimony. We didn't get the amendment, but I'm thinking that would be a step in the right direction, especially considering the case of Tom Ball, who burned himself in the Keene courthouse a couple years ago. Okay, that's all.
Is there any other questions? Okay. Just go ahead and shoot it out real quick, because you've been raising your hands since the beginning.
I've heard anecdotal statements in the past about private companies like electricians, plumbers, cable workers being either ordered or incentivized to report when they might see child.
They're legally, not only, it's a legal thing. So doctors, for instance, have to call Child Protective Services for like a whole list of things. It's usually the nurses that call. I don't know, but I'll research it. That sounds really interesting. I'll totally check that out. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to my attention. What's up? Oh, wait.
How likely is it that they would actually go get a warrant if you tell them that they can't come in your home without a warrant?
It's case dependent on the supposed allegation. Like, you remember that false allegation I was talking about with the Mexican mafia with all the drugs and everything else? I could have gotten a warrant in about 5 seconds in that particular case. I actually brought cops with me. I was told to bring cops in that case. Oh, Jesus, there was one more thing I wanted to bring up. The drug war thing. Okay, so essentially, Child Protective Services, a vast majority of their cases, they remove kids because they're supposedly using drugs. So there's a few different ways that they might go to test you. One is they'll ask you, have you ever used marijuana? Admitting to it in college can be considered a good enough chance that you're a present marijuana user, and they might be able to remove your kids for that reason. That's why I say, if you're a marijuana advocate and you're a parent, really watch your ass, right? Especially with the people that you choose to spend your time with, and really pay attention to who you decide to smoke pot with. There's a lot of reports that I got where it's like, well, I went to this friend's house, and his parent was smoking weed, and I called the Child Protective Services for it. So come on, watch yourselves in regards to this. It's important. Not only that, there's two other ways they can test you. One is an oral swab drug test that they give you at your home. Fun fact about oral swab drug tests, they cannot tell if you've taken any drugs if it was over 72 hours ago. Cocaine's out of your system in 12 hours with an oral swab drug test. Marijuana, 72 hours. Pseudoephedrine meth is 24 hours. So we actually did a drug test on someone who was on meth, who admitted right after doing the drug test they're on meth, and they didn't test positive for meth. They had just smoked it. So those tests suck. And the other test they might do is a court-ordered mandated urine test. You can look up online as to maybe some ways to manipulate that, but I'm not going to go too much in that right now. Vitamin B and creatine, folks. A lot of water.
You could mention obesity as one of the things. Is that a big thing for removing kids? And what is this whole school for lunch program? Has that affected CPS in any way?
School lunch program?
Yeah. You know, calorie counts, Michelle Obama's thing.
Well, I think the state getting involved with kids at all generally leads to more court cases for Child Protective Services. I'm not sure of that exactly, though. And when it comes to the minority issue, if you take a look at the percentages as far as the percentage of children that are removed, it is way higher in with black communities. Essentially, investigators go in there and they go, well, this isn't like my white home. This is much different. Therefore, I have to remove these kids. So there's a racist bias. I mean, and again, the foundation of Child Protective Services is insanely racist, so it shouldn't be much of a shocker.
So for the past year, I've been standing by trying to support a family that has a CPS case. I have a rampant amount of questions for you. Maybe it'd be best to take them afterwards. These are poor individuals who are dependent on the state. He's a vet, fought as a Marine, lives off his pension or whatever he gets as a result. So they're already dependent. They don't have a lot of resources. It seems like they're being dragged around. And I want to, couple questions. I want to understand why, in my observations of what's happening to them, it seems so arbitrary. And I wonder, what is the incentive for the social worker to keep moving the bar around when they meet and exceed expectations? It keeps shifting, and the case is never closed, even though in 2 months we'll have you back in court and we're going to close the case. They haven't visited. They just continue to put off the closing of the case, so that there's this thing hanging over this family's head. What is in it for the social worker? I kind of want to understand that. I don't know why it's, anyway.
So Child Protective Service investigators have been some of the worst human beings I've ever met when it comes to holding grudges and biases or anything else. So like a caseworker will see a particular case and he'll say, oh, there's drug use, and they have a history of Child Protective Services cases. So again, remember the issue with anonymous reports I was saying? So even if I close 15 cases, all of them are being shown to be completely fraudulent, the caseworker looks at it and goes, oh my God, there's been 15 open cases? I can be a hero and be the one who finally proves that there's abuse. Then they go out there, they see that abuse isn't actually occurring, but maybe the person's rude to them because they're jaded. Then they have essentially a vengeance on this individual. And I really did see that. Just going after people because they didn't like them. Oh, that's...
This is so asinine. The children are destroyed. These kids are so afraid they're never going to see their parents again when they get tucked in at night.
Yeah, I completely agree. I hold no like positive feelings regarding this. I call it a terror cell for a reason. Year and a month. I quit after my last case involved a mom getting shot, and a lot of things that basically led up to me quitting. But I was, post-traumatic stress disorder is a real thing, and working for CPS was one of the worst things I've ever done in my entire life. After I quit, I didn't start up doing my show Truth Over Comfort immediately because I was still in Texas, and they go after advocates, right? There's never been a single CPS investigator to go out against Child Protective Services in the last 30 years, right? None. Because they'll go after them, right? I have no kids. I'm not married. All of my family is over 18 years old. All my extended family lives in a place where Child Protective Services doesn't exist. The best chance they got is pretty much just shooting me, and I think my chances are kind of low in regards to that, hopefully. Ugh. I don't know. Maybe Alex Jones is right, and a black helicopter is going to come over me right now and drone me. I'm not sure. I hope not. But until then, if I die under any weird circumstances in the next 2 years, it's probably because I fell or something.
That's why I'm preparing y'all just in case they come after you. None of you saw me.
So I know a lot of, not a lot, but I know several libertarian government school teachers. And sometimes they're like, oh, I feel so bad because I work for the government. And I always cheer them on and say, we need good people in those positions because you're the only voice of reason some kids are ever going to hear. Would you recommend that liberty-minded people be involved, to be whistleblowers, or be a balancing?
Okay, so I've been asked this question as far as like working within the system. So that's on. So drug tests turn out negative sometimes. And but in regards to Child Protective Services, though, what happened with me was that I had one removal in an entire year with Child Protective Services versus the average, which is maybe 40 or 50 by the other investigators. So there was that beneficial, right? But it's really, really short-lasting. So at the end of my cases, my supervisor started looking at all my work because I had all these things that were thrown out as far as these are fraudulent cases. And in her mind, that means I'm a shitty investigator because obviously this abuse is abundant because I hated doing removals. The only removal I had was because the cops actually came and stated, oh, well, in this particular case, this kid needs to be removed by law, right? There's nothing I could do in that particular case. And in that particular case, it kind of made sense. It was my first case, which was I walked into a house after a drug raid and I could smell shit throughout the entire house. I walk into the back by a DEA agent, and there is children's feces all over the wall and on the floor. And what they were doing, the drug dealers were getting the kids to shit in the room in order to prevent other drug dealers from coming in and stealing their drugs. The windows were all boarded up. I went outside to go talk to the mother, who called me a cunt. And that was my first day, by the way. This is my first 8 hours of job. Okay? First 8 hours. And so she was yelling at me. Everyone else was yelling at me. The grandma came out and she was like, I'll take in the kids. I don't want them to go to the foster home because they're going to get molested there. And the investigator who I was training on her goes, fuck that bitch. She's not going with them. Straight like that, right? Bianca Garcia, San Antonio, Texas. Fuck you. And we ended up taking the kids out of the home. They got taken to a foster home. And in my mind at the time, this foster home was kind of clean. At first we kept them in the headquarters for like 8 hours. And I was a little emotionally drained. So I ended up trying to talk these kids to calm them down and everything else. Bring them to a foster home. And all the kids were able to go to the foster home. I was like, great. This isn't going to be that bad. Next day we separate all the kids. And they're all drugged to death. And then whenever they all got put back into public school. And all of them were put in alternative schools, which are schools for bad kids, pretty much immediately because you got a bunch of drugged kids. So we stuck them in a prison right after that particular occurrence. Then the investigator I was working with basically manipulated the mom as far as being able to see her kids because she hated the woman. So she wasn't really able to see her kids anymore, in part because she just didn't like the woman because maybe when her kids were getting removed and there was a drug raid at her house, maybe she was a little mad. So that was my first case. Yeah. So as far as keeping liberty-minded people there, the thing is that I don't know how much it does necessarily, and as well as you're going to get fired pretty quickly. Because you're not getting enough removals, or you're not getting the state enough money. And although the investigator isn't directly funded more money for every single movie you have, you get more money for tenure for like every single year that you're working there. And if you got all the removals, it looks like you're a hard-working investigator, and you can get up to $64,000 to $70,000 a year. You know, and if you say have a degree in jazz, like one of the investigators at my office had, degree in saxophone, right, and 2 months training, and you have the ability to be able to do more than, in some cases, what a cop can do. So, yeah.
Parens patria doesn't come out of the blue. It has to do with the contract that a man and a woman sign with the state when they get married.
Yeah, which is true, but here's the thing about that. If it had to do with legal like decisions, I could remove a kid even if the parents were illegally here and so were the kids. So it didn't even matter if they were paying taxes. Any kid in the state. Though the legal framework may have kind of started that like that, although it did also state that anyone who is mentally unfit as well. And I don't think they signed any contract that stated, I'm mentally unfit.
In regards to children.
In regards to children.
So you described CPS as being a terrorist cell, and I totally agree. My question is it seems like it would be more risky for parents to get involved in, I guess, anti-terrorist activity. You know, trying to have some kind of anti-CPS activism. Is that true? To what extent? And what kind of activism can people do? What kind of anti-terrorist activity can we engage in that might actually affect change?
In the case of Child Protective Services, they have whenever people, advocates against Child Protective Services, I was helping out a case in California with a lot of people who were against CPS, and they kept on nagging them and nagging them and nagging them. But it's weird. It's like this mixed thing. If you have a Child Protective Services case against you, and then you go to the media, in places like Kentucky where there was this amazing local news thing against Child Protective Services where they went through all the numbers, a lot of cases ended up getting thrown out. So it's really a back and forth thing, and it's kind of weighing in your options. I don't suggest a lot of people to be vocally against Child Protective Services who are parents, and that's just a personal choice that you're going to have to make yourself. I cannot, tell anyone in regards to that. The reason why I'm so vocal is because I don't have any kids. I don't have as much to lose. There's a chance something could happen, but we all take our risks.
Hello, I'm Jordan. I think this is about child abuse, right? I'm not sure, yeah. Well, I was actually abused as a kid, and it was really rough on me. And, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional.
Outside of foster families, how much abuse was there that you found?
So by my definition of abuse, I saw it quite a bit, but that's not the legal definition of abuse. So under my views, I view spanking as a form of abuse towards a child, but according to the state, it's not, right? So for that reason, I saw that as abusive, but there was no removal I could do in regards to that. And because I knew about foster homes, I couldn't morally try to justify that particular action. It was interesting, though. I had a lot of interesting conversations with parents who were spankers who stated categorically, I don't know of other ways, and I offered them resources. I kept a book around called Parent Effectiveness Training. I would just give them the book, like, here you go, like, let's talk about this. And I kept in touch with some of those people. And I'll tell you this much, that conversation was certainly better than removing the kids and destroying these people's lives and, putting them hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. There was a father who spent $200,000 disproving a sexual abuse case. I mean, this is just over and over and over again, and my fucking email is flooded with people being screwed over by Child Protective Services. And the thing about Child Protective Services is this: if I get a message that states my children were removed 2 years ago and I'm legally not allowed to have them, what can I do? You can try and sue, and that's about it. But for me, like, the amount of advice I can give is not that much, which is why I think it's so important for people to know what to do if they come after you, so I can help in the beginning, you know? And I'm just trying as much as I can, but because they are so unconstitutional and because they have their own laws, it's hard to fight the Leviathan. It's a kind of hopeless discussion, isn't it? All right, let's...
Not so much of a question, but I never met CPS, but I had a teacher try to convince me to say that I was abused at home. And when she wasn't paying attention, I looked at the notes, and apparently my father cursed, and that's what started it. He said a bad word. And so that's what they were coming after me for.
What do you say when you are speaking with someone who is like, well, if you don't call Child Protective Services, what do you do when you feel that a child is being neglected? Like, I have a friend who works, there's some sort of a volunteer charity dental service that they provide to kids. And I guess that they go to the schools or something. And she's like, you know, these kids' teeth are rotting out of their mouths, and they have Medicaid, so they could go to a dentist and get their teeth taken care of, but the parents choose not to for whatever reason. Like, what do you say to someone in that case? Like, well, what can you do, or what should you do?
Thanks for the easy question. It's hard to say. I mean, it depends on trying to form some kind of relationship with the person who's abusing them. I mean, that's why I'm so, I so much back the Free State Project and the Blue Ridge Liberty Project in Asheville, where you're creating these communities where people can be vocal in regards to relationship dynamics and trying to educate these people as best as you can. It's such a difficult question, and I can't state categorically this is what you should do or this is what you shouldn't do. It's really a case by case thing, and I know Child Protective Services has maybe helped out a small percentage of the families, but it's just imagine a kid who has decaying teeth. Child Protective Services comes in and says, well, you're going to get removed and you get thrown in the foster home, and this kid starts getting molested. You're just like, what the yeah, it's really hard to weigh it out.
My name is Donna, and I've been in early childhood for the last 32 years, and I owned a small school in St. Augustine, Florida for a while, which was primarily for Protective Services children and children from low income. I purchased it from a lady who purposely built it for that reason. So it was quite an eye-opener for me to take care of these children on a daily basis, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying. The teachers, it is mandated in Florida that if you're an early childhood provider that you do have to report anything that you even suspect, not full evidence. If you just have a child that says something to you or you see evidence on a child, you are obligated to call. And if you don't, and then somebody else does, and they say, oh yeah, well, they must know at the child care center because, you know, they change diapers or have more exposure to the child to be able to see evidence, they haven't said anything, then they will come over to your child care center and go after your staff for not reporting it. So the teachers are really nervous because they don't want to report because they know what the outcome could be sending the children to other homes, and yet they are afraid for themselves too that if they don't report it, then the authorities are going to come after them. So it's really, really a difficult situation there. And now I'm a child care consultant, and many times when I go into centers to help them in many different aspects, teachers will inevitably come up to me and say, what do I do? I'm just so afraid on this side, but I'm so afraid on this side too. They're worried, like, do I protect myself or do I protect the child? And so a lot of it does go unrecorded. And in my personal history, I've had to record 2 cases where the children were horribly abused by their parents and did end up in wonderful homes. And then on the other hand, I've seen a family of 6 children ripped away from me where Child Protective Services just came to my center with no warning in darkened cars, men in suits, flashed a badge at me and just removed a family of 6 right in front of me with the kids screaming and hanging on to me. And the oldest child saying, I'm never going to see my family again. We're all going to go somewhere different. And that's exactly what happened. Now, as adults, they've all gotten together again. But there's that fear on both sides, so you're kind of stuck. You just don't know what the best thing to do is.
Nothing I can really add to that. That is the ultimate plague as far as this is concerned, because we know abuse is happening, but the only agency which is legally allowed to really do anything about it is an abusive agency. And that's why I think it is important that more people are outspoken in regards to Child Protective Services, just so more people are aware not to call them. But with that needs to also be brought the message, we also as a community need to try and prevent child abuse at a grassroots level. And there's different community centers that are being set up to try and do that. Yeah. Well, and it's 3. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone who came out. Oh, and again, if any of y'all want more information, go to truthovercomfort.net. That's my website. Everything is on there regarding Child Protective Services, stats, resources, and all the other good stuff. So thank you very much.